Hey everyone, Andrew here for a new segment on my channel. As you can see from the title, it is called Andrew Reviews. And so if you watched the finale of the Coffee Talk video yesterday, you would be aware that I was making this video. But for those who are unaware, I guess I should introduce it, obviously, since this is the first episode. But essentially, Andrew Reviews is just a video that I will upload after I complete a certain game on my channel. And, I was kind of toying around with if I wanted to do some sort of, like, interesting name, maybe something utilizing alliteration, like how I did for Barista Basics. But since this obviously relates to the gaming, segment, the gaming aspect of my channel, I figured, since that's called Andrew Plays, Andrew Reviews would be a good. Sorry, there's a really cute chipmunk. What are you doing? Oh, so cute. Okay. Sorry. This is why I can't film outside, because I get distracted. But anyway, so it's called Andrew Reviews because it sort of goes along with Andrew Plays. So yeah, we can go ahead and show off our little kind of pseudo cheat sheet here, I guess. And so as we can see, I have came up with or decided on 5 different, metrics or categories that I will use to rank each game. So, when I was thinking about doing this video, I was thinking about what, sort of aspects are universal throughout most games, almost every game. And I came up with these 5. So I guess what I will do real quick is go ahead and just explain each one of these categories in a general sense, and then I can go ahead and get into more specifics regarding why I rated each category as I did and how it relates to Coffee Talk. So our first category here is story. So obviously story is the plot of the game. It's the events that occur throughout the game. This is usually what draws people in to a game, besides if it has some sort of unique gameplay element. But usually the story is what draws people in, because that's it's like a movie. It has interesting elements, moments that make you happy, moments that make you sad. It keeps you on your toes. The story does, of course. So I feel like that's a pretty kind of baseline aspect of almost all video games. I can't really think of a video game that doesn't have a story. Well, okay. There are certain games, like kind of more simulation games, or creative games like Minecraft or The Sims don't really have a set story because you are kind of making the story yourself. But I digress. Most games have a story. So, right, that's the first category. Our second category here is characters, and this, of course, relates heavily to the story because the characters are the plot device that, of course, move the story forward. A story can't really progress if there's no characters to have the events happen to or to make certain events happen. So I feel like characters are also a pretty universal and pivotal aspect of a game. Moving on to our third metric here, our third category, which is gameplay. Now, this is something that is universal through every single game. Obviously, if you're playing a video game, there has to be some sort of interactive element to it, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't really be a game. So, it just goes without saying, gameplay is how you go about playing the game. What the controls are, what you need to do if, we know what gameplay is. Moving on to our next metric here, visuals. This is also something that is, of course, in every single game, because if there's no visuals, you wouldn't be able to see what you're doing. And so visuals can obviously include how the characters look, how how the scenery looks, the background, anything that you're looking at at the game is considered a visual aspect. Moving on to our last category here, audio. Now, usually in games, this entails some sort of voice acting. However, this can also simply just include, music of the game, or, sound effects of the game even would be included in this as well. And also, as we can see on the bottom, I also am going to obviously average these scores for each game so that there is sort of a quick, you know, you I'd appreciate you watching this video, but you can click this video and find this little screen grab here and say, okay, Coffee Talk is 4 out of 5 stars. Good to know. Let's see how that compares to, whatever game I play next and the game after that. It's kind of just something that makes it a little easier to draw comparisons in a general sense, of course. So yeah, that explains sort of the skeleton of our little pseudo cheat sheet here. Now we can go ahead and elaborate on why I rated each category like I did. So to start off, story. I rated story 5 out of 5 hearts because, of course, Coffee Talk is a narrative, story-driven game. That's literally the point of the game, as we all are aware, is just reading dialogue, essentially. And I decided to give it 5 out of 5 hearts because I quite enjoyed the different story arcs and sort of the pacing of them as well. It's not like, a character and a certain story arc got introduced and then was immediately resolved the same day or the next day even. Most of the story arcs started relatively near the beginning of the game and had some sort of conclusion towards the end of the game, which of course makes it very satisfying and keeps you interested because, you are like, oh my god, Rachel and her dad are getting in a fight, and oh my god, now Rachel's dad got beat up, or whatever. It, needless to say, very interesting story. A game like Coffee Talk, given its purpose, if it didn't have a 5 out of 5 story, then the game wouldn't really be worth playing, right? So 5 out of 5 stars, absolutely love the story. Also, I loved the story throughout the whole game, but if you watched the finale yesterday, what occurred after the credits literally blew my mind. I mean, you heard in the video, but even afterwards when I was uploading it and I was at my computer, I was just shook. I'm still in disbelief about it. I still don't really even understand it. But anyways, yeah, that was just sort of the cherry on top. I guess I'd give it 5.5 stars, 5.5 hearts, just for that little interesting element right there at the end. But yeah, so 5 out of 5, love the story. Moving on to characters, obviously this relates to the story. I also gave this 5 out of 5 hearts because each character was very unique. Obviously, not only in their appearance, each character looked very different and had very distinctive features, but their personalities were also very different. Not only were the personalities between the characters very different, but also the characters themselves and their individual personalities were also very complex. Some people were, kind of a bit naive, and some people were a bit shy and, kind of maybe came out of their shell a little bit. Some people are kind of more of a hard ass. Some people are really understanding. Some people are a bit annoying. Cough, cough, Freya. But yeah, so needless to say, each character physically and personality-wise, very unique and very memorable. So, of course, I had to give it 5 out of 5 hearts for that. Moving on to gameplay. For this one, I was a little torn on how I wanted to rate this, obviously because there's not really a gameplay element except the drink-making sequence. But, I was thinking, would I give it, 2 hearts because it doesn't really have gameplay? And I was originally going to do that, but, I got to thinking about it more, and I was like, well, the point of Coffee Talk isn't really to have, elaborate gameplay or, really crazy controls or whatever. It's a narrative, story-driven game, of course, and that is what the creators of the game wanted us to focus on. So with that said, I decided to give gameplay 4 out of 5 hearts. Now the reason I didn't rate it perfectly is obviously because I still do feel that there are some improvements that could have been made. Um, for example, maybe making the beverage making sequence a bit more complex, instead of just having, you know, clicking something 3 times and brewing it. I do have to say, though, that the latte art aspect of it was very interesting. Quite enjoyed that. You know, a nice little fun element. But yeah, maybe something a little more challenging in that aspect, or perhaps even having dialogue options. You know, me as the barista having, you know, dialogue options to, you know, obviously have affect the story in a different way. That would have been pretty fun and interesting. Maybe even perhaps utilizing the smartphone more in a more substantial way. You know, the smartphone was basically there just to review the recipes for the drinks and to like stock, low-key stock, or check out each character's Toma de Chill profiles. Now, you know, maybe something interesting that could have been done with that would be like having to do some like sort of investigative work, kind of, you know, like having to do a bit of snooping or something, like into a person's Toma de Chill account and like, you know, drawing certain conclusions and stuff. That would have been a pretty interesting. It would have been something that would have made the gameplay a bit more interesting. But with all that said, still, I decided to give it 4 out of 5 hearts because, again, that's not really the point of Coffee Talk. So for what it's worth, I do think the gameplay was more than satisfactory. Yeah. So moving on to our 4th category here, visuals. I gave this, as we can see, 5 out of 5 hearts because I, first of all, am just a sucker for pixel art. I love me some good pixel art. Not all pixel art is created equal, mind you. But the pixel art in this game was beautiful. The characters, beautiful. Absolutely loved it. And to sort of speak more on the characters too, since obviously those were the main visual aspects of the game, they, like I mentioned previously, were each very easily identifiable, you know, because their features are very unique to each character. But, you know, the characters themselves were very vibrant. You know, they had bright colors, almost all of them did, in some way or form, some way, shape, or form, which I think provided a really nice contrast sort of against the more drab, you know, calming coffee shop background, as well as the gloomy rain that always seemed to be pouring in Seattle in the game. I guess, you know, which makes sense. I've heard that it rains in Seattle quite a bit. But yeah, I thought that not only the art style itself, but also how the how colors were utilized were very interesting and effective. So I decided to give that 5 out of 5 hearts. And we have our final metric here, which is audio. Now, obviously, in this game, there was no voice acting. There were only certain sound effects, and obviously the music was the main audio aspect. Now, I decided to rate this 3.5 hearts simply because I feel like the music maybe could have been a bit more diversified, not in the sense of like changing the vibe, but just, you know, literally having more songs that were kind of similar to the ones already in the game. Not saying that I didn't enjoy the game audio. It was very calming and soothing, which totally suits the style of Coffee Talk. But with that said, you know, I can't remember exactly, but I think there were maybe 3 or 4 main sort of like background musics that what's the word, rotated, that were repeated. I do remember, however, that during the Gala Fury sequence, the music got really kind of intense and stuff, which was pretty cool. That was a nice, interesting change of pace. Obviously, because the game has been pretty calming up to that point, the music itself has been pretty calming. And then having sort of a high stress, high tension scenario was reflected well in the music choice then. But also with that said, I quite enjoyed the little sound effects. For example, when Neil spoke, um, they kind of sounded like bleeps and bloops, kind of, you know, like a robot, which was pretty cute. Um, and, the, kind of just the subtle sound effects, like when the newspaper would come up at the beginning of each day and you would, like, hear the sound of, like, paper rustling, or, when you are in the beveraging sequence and, you hear the steamer go off and, the espresso pull, whatever. Those were also some pretty fun sound effects too. Hearing the rain in the background was also very calming. But yeah, I decided, like I said, to give it 3.5 hearts because I just felt that maybe we could have chosen even just 2 more songs of a similar vibe to just create a bit more diversity in the audio track. Um, yeah, so that is it for our 5 categories here. Obviously, as we can see on the bottom, the average of these scores is 4.5 hearts, so a near perfect game. Of course, in my opinion, obviously these opinions are mine. You can take them with a grain of salt. You should, because you should play the game and formulate your own opinion. But yeah, anyways, I found the game to be almost near perfect. Well, I guess I don't really need this anymore now that we've seen everything. Um, I really I just loved playing the game, and I'm so glad that it was the first game that I played on my channel.